Are you deaf or just stupid? The sharp voice of Madeline Hart, heir to the Hart Hotel's empire, cut through the marble lobby like a razor. She stood in heels too high for comfort, towering over the petite maid who had accidentally bumped her cleaning cart into the corner of a velvet chair. You people have one job. Do you even understand the language, or do you need me to draw it in crayons? Silence. Guests looked on, some chuckling under their breath, others frozen, unsure whether to intervene or pretend it didn't happen. The maid, uniform faded and sleeves stained with years of unseen labor, kept her eyes low. Her name tag read Irene, barely legible now. She murmured an apology, calm, clear, precise. No accent, no confusion, just pain buried beneath practiced humility. But Madeline wasn't finished. Don't just stand there. Clean it. Or better yet, maybe you're better suited cleaning the sidewalk. Like the rest of your people? A few people laughed. Not all. But enough. And in that moment, something small cracked in the air around Irene. Not her. She didn't flinch. But something shifted. You could feel it. Attention. The kind that says, this story isn't over. This is just the first page. It wasn't the first time Irene had been humiliated, nor the worst. But it was the first time someone with that much power had done it so publicly. She returned to the service hallway, silent. The walls there were lined with peeling paint and whispered resentment. Other workers, janitors, dishwashers, kitchen staff, kept their heads down too. They had all been Irene at some point. Later that evening, while scrubbing wine out of carpet in one of the executive suites, Irene overheard something. Two men, both in tailored suits, too drunk to care if the door was fully shut. I told Madeline she shouldn't have sent those transfers through the foundation account. It's shady as hell. She's got her father eating out of her hand. No audit's going to touch her. Besides, who's going to report her? The maids? Laughter. Slurred and smug. Irene stopped scrubbing. Just for a moment. That name again. Madeline. She stood slowly, set down the scrub brush, and turned her head toward the door. Something flickered in her gaze, like the ghost of a decision not yet made. Irene hadn't always been invisible. 10 years earlier, she wore a different uniform, that of a graduate student at a prestigious university in the Northeast. She had a thesis on social ethics, a mentor who believed in her, and a mother whose hands were always cracked from cleaning other people's houses. But a fire took the house. The mother died 2 weeks later, lungs weakened by bleach and smoke. The insurance company denied the claim. Technicality, and the world didn't stop. It never does. So Irene stopped being Irene, the academic. She became Irene, the hotel maid, the quiet one, the one who listens, the one who remembers. The next day, she walked into work early, like always. She didn't speak of the humiliation, didn't ask for an apology, didn't report anything. Instead, she began observing, listening, collecting. Over weeks, she noticed patterns. Unusual deliveries. Off-schedule meetings between Madeline and certain consultants in unoccupied penthouse suites. And then there was the file, one mistakenly left open on a laptop while she was cleaning. It contained wire transfers, offshore accounts, donations from the Hart Foundation to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Attached was a memo. Ensure quarterly reports reflect rounded expense values, not actuals. She didn't copy it. Not then. She was too careful for that. But she remembered every line. Later, in the maintenance room, she logged into an old library account from her university days. It still worked. A small miracle. From there, she started digging, connecting dots, following names. A digital paper trail of corruption that led all the way back to Madeline, her father, and at least 3 politicians with public anti-corruption campaigns. And Irene? She was nobody, which made her dangerous. One night, Irene sat in the break room alone. Her phone vibrated. A text from her cousin, a journalist no one would publish. "You sure you want to do this?" She stared at the screen. "Yes," she typed, "but not yet. Let them look down on me one more time. I want their masks off." A week later, Madeline strolled through the staff entrance. A tour for some charity press stunt. A photographer trailed behind her like a puppy. "Show us how the ... Unsung heroes do their magic," she said with a smirk, eyeing Irene. Irene smiled back. A quiet, steady smile. "I'd be honored." She handed Madeline a mop. The room went still. Madeline laughed, sharp and shrill. "You're joking." Irene didn't blink. "Would you like to see what it's like to be me? Or do you prefer your staged empathy at a safe distance?" The photographer snapped a picture. Madeline's jaw tightened. But the image was captured. Arrogance exposed. It went viral later that night. That was just the beginning. Irene submitted the evidence anonymously, through encrypted channels. Her cousin confirmed the story would break in under a week. She just had to hold on. But news travels fast inside the halls of power. Madeline must have sensed something. The next morning, Irene was called to HR. "We've received some concerns about your performance," said the woman behind the desk, not meeting Irene's eyes. "You've been seen in areas you weren't assigned to." Irene nodded, doing extra work, cleaning up others' mistakes. "As always, I'm afraid we'll have to let you go." She stood, calmly, without resistance. As she walked out of the building, the same marble floors that once echoed her humiliation now caught the sound of her footsteps, slow, even, unbothered. That evening, the news broke. Offshore accounts, fraud, money laundering, exploitation of tax shelters via charity fronts. Names named, faces shown. The Heart Foundation at the center of it all. And the first image shown on screen? A photograph of Madeline, flinching under a camera flash, holding a mop she never touched. By morning, the city was on fire, not with flames, but with questions. News anchors spat headlines with urgency. Social media boiled over with outrage. Investigations launched. Donors withdrew. Politicians distanced themselves with vague, slippery statements. But the one question no one could answer was, who exposed them? Inside boardrooms and back channels, the rich and powerful panicked. The Hart family issued a statement. All smooth lies and hollow charity speak. Madeline didn't show up for her usual stroll through the hotel that day. For the first time, she was hiding. But Irene? Irene stood outside the building, in plain view, in the same uniform, watching them all squirm. She had no press conference, no spotlight, no need. She had done what they never expected. She broke them without ever raising her voice. That week, she applied for dozens of jobs. She was used to rejection. Invisible people usually are. But this time, something had shifted. A few callbacks. A few open doors. One came from a law firm that had seen the anonymous leak. They traced it back through layered channels, then found a single clue, a quote in the file, something from an old ethics thesis. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity, not humility. It was Irene's. They didn't out her. They invited her. Not as a janitor, not as a case study, as a strategist. She hesitated. The offer was generous, a chance to change lives. But part of her still burned. Not with hate. She'd never had time for that, but with unfinished truth. So she asked for a delay. 1 week. In that final week, the Hart family spiraled. More documents surfaced. More whistleblowers stepped forward. Turns out, no one wants to go down with a ship captained by arrogance. Madeline was photographed sobbing outside a courthouse, her father stopped appearing in public. And then came the gala. Every year, the Hart Foundation hosted a black-tie charity gala. Lavish, hypocritical, soaked in champagne and backroom deals. This year, they insisted it would go on. A statement of strength, they said. And Irene? She attended, not as staff. As a guest, a lawyer from the firm helped her get in. Clean dress. Simple heels. No jewelry. But she didn't need armor. She had the truth. Inside, chandeliers glittered above carefully rehearsed smiles. Waiters circled. A quartet played something inoffensive. And in the center of it all stood Madeline, makeup perfect, eyes glassy. She saw Irene across the room, froze. Their eyes locked. And for the first time in her life, Madeline looked afraid. Irene approached slowly. Guests turned to watch. No one knew who she was. But they could feel something building in the air, like a storm behind velvet curtains. "Miss Hart," Irene said calmly. Her voice carried, even through the soft music. Madeline blinked, trying to keep her composure. "You don't belong here?" Irene smiled, not cruelly, but with clarity. "Neither do you." A beat, murmur spread. And then Irene lifted a small flash drive from her bag, barely noticeable, except to the security man, who immediately started walking toward her. "I'd be careful," Irene said, without turning. "This drive contains proof of additional accounts tied to the Hart Foundation, with timestamps, audio, emails. You try to stop me, it gets sent to every major outlet in the country in under 30 seconds. Silence. Then gasps. One of the donors near Madeline stepped back. Another looked down, embarrassed. Someone whispered, "Is it true?" Madeline didn't speak. Her face was frozen in something between rage and collapse. "I don't want revenge," Irene continued. "You're not important enough for that. I want recognition. Not for me, for everyone you used. Everyone you mocked. Everyone you stepped on to reach this floor." The music stopped. A server put down a tray. And suddenly, the room wasn't on her side anymore. It was on Irene's. The next morning, a video went viral again. But this time, it wasn't about scandal. It was about justice. The clip showed Irene walking calmly through the gala, flash drive in hand, as Madeline stood silent. It captured the moment where one woman, quiet, overlooked, invisible, turned the most powerful room in the city into a courtroom. By noon, Madeline resigned from the foundation. By sunset, her father stepped down as CEO. And Irene? She didn't give interviews. She didn't post. She accepted the job at the law firm. But not to chase glory, to protect others like her. The firm offered her more than a desk. They gave her her own project, the Invisible Files, she called it. A system to track whistleblower complaints, exploitation, and labor abuses hidden behind legal shields. She knew the game now. She had played it quietly. Won it silently. She wasn't just a maid. She was a witness, a force. One evening, while walking home, she passed the hotel again. Another maid, new, young, struggling with a cart, dropped a bucket. A manager nearby opened his mouth to scold her, then paused. He looked at Irene, watching from the sidewalk, and said nothing. The young maid picked up the bucket, nodded awkwardly, and pushed on. Small changes, subtle, but real. At her desk later that week, Irene opened her old thesis. She hadn't read it in years. Her name was still at the top, faded from print. But the words remained sharp. She added a new line at the end. The world doesn't change because the powerful fall. It changes when the unseen rise. The months that followed moved fast, but Irene never did. She walked slowly, always had, like someone who understood the weight of silence, like someone who had learned to listen to what others missed. The Invisible Files project grew quietly under her lead. Workers from janitorial staff to hospital aides, from nannies to delivery drivers, began submitting complaints through the encrypted system. Stories poured in like blood from a wound the world refused to bandage. She read everyone. Some made her cry. Some made her angry. Most reminded her that people didn't break from cruelty. They broke from being ignored afterward. She built a team. Young legal minds, some just like her, first-generation students, children of immigrants, survivors of eviction, abuse, deportation threats. They were relentless, brilliant, undeniable. And Irene? She became a name whispered with respect in certain circles. The kind of name that said, "Don't underestimate her. She sees everything," but recognition never changed her. She still lived in the same small apartment, still took the bus, still did her own laundry at the coin machines downstairs, where no one asked for last names and everyone nodded hello. Until one day, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. A voice spoke. Tight, measured, female. "You don't know me, but you helped someone I care about. My name is Claire Mercer." Irene said nothing, letting the woman speak. "I'm on the board of the Civil Ethics Alliance. We'd like to honor you this year, publicly, if that's something you'd be open to. Recognition. On a stage, a microphone, a name on a screen." Irene's silence stretched long. "I'm not interested in applause," she said finally. Claire's voice softened. "I think you are. Just not for you." 2 weeks later, Irene stood behind the curtain of a grand theater. Hundreds of chairs, cameras, lights, names she'd once cleaned the dirt beneath, now seated, watching, waiting. The host gave a speech. Applause followed. And then, "Our final honoree tonight is someone who never asked for the spotlight, but became one for others." Irene walked slowly to the podium, not in a gown, just a simple black dress. Her hair tied back, clear eyes. The room stilled. She looked out. Not everyone in the audience knew her story, but they would. She began. "When I was 15, I used to scrub the floors of a restaurant where the cooks screamed in languages I didn't speak and the owners pretended not to see. At 19, I was a college student writing about justice, while my mother worked double shifts just to keep us housed. By 23, I had buried her with money I borrowed and never repaid. I lost everything in one fire, except my ability to pay attention. That was the year I became a maid. People stopped seeing me after that, even when I stood right in front of them. They spoke secrets in elevators I scrubbed. They called me sweetheart, girl, thing. They mistook silence for stupidity, uniforms for weakness, and brown skin for servitude. But I was always listening, not to expose, but to understand how deep the rot went. And when I found the truth, I didn't want revenge. I wanted change. There was no applause at first, just breathless stillness. Then, a rising wave of claps, building like rain, slow, then deafening. Some rose to their feet. A few wiped tears. And backstage, someone whispered, "She said more in 5 minutes than most do in their entire careers." That night, Irene walked home alone, not because no one offered her a ride, but because she still preferred quiet streets, the sound of her own steps, the long pause between applause and the next fight. Autumn came, and with it, a certain kind of stillness. The city's noise dulled. Leaves drifted like slow confessions down side streets. Irene worked longer hours, not because she had to, but because now people listened, and that meant they brought their stories. A nurse who hadn't been paid overtime in 2 years. A gardener who'd been fired for reporting pesticides that made him sick. A young Manny accused of theft when a senator's wife lost her earrings, only for the earrings to be found later in the senator's golf bag. Each case was different. But each had one thing in common. Power had been allowed to lie because no one asked it to speak honestly. Now they had Irene, and she never shouted. She simply refused to back down. One Friday, as the sky turned violet over the city skyline, she stood in an old community hall. A workers' town hall, modest, creaky floors, barely enough chairs. She was invited by a friend, a former janitor who now led a local labor rights group. People filed in, some in uniforms, some in hoodies, some in silence. They knew who she was now, the maid with the receipts, the one who brought down the hearts. But she never acted like a hero. She began the night the same way she always did. My name is Irene. I cleaned rooms no one thanked me for. I watched people lie or they called me forgettable. And I'm here to remind you, they see you only when you stand together. Someone raised a hand. A woman, early 40s, eyes tired. What if we don't have proof? Just stories. Just bruises they don't count. Irene looked at her. You're the proof, she said. You've survived them. The room was quiet again. Then applause. Not loud, but real. Another woman whispered, I needed to hear that. Later that night, as Irene packed her notes, a man approached her in the hallway. Tall, expensive watch, suit too clean for a building like this. Irene, he said, do you have a minute? She paused, measured. Depends on what you're selling. He laughed, too loudly. Nothing. Just ... opportunity. He handed her a card. It read, Westwood Consulting. Private crisis and reputation management. We'd like you on our side, he said. You're sharp. You've got credibility now. If you consult with us, discreetly, of course, we could offer you more than you're making at the firm. Much more. She held the card, looked at him. And who are your clients? She asked. People in tough situations, he said. CEOs. Public figures. People who might have ... stumbled. People like the Hearts? He smiled. Non-committal. People with reach. People who'd rather solve things quietly. With someone who understands both sides. Irene studied him, then handed the card back. I don't work between sides, she said. I work beneath them. With the people you try to bury, it was happening again. The way they tried to pull her in, repackage her, spin her into a commodity. But she'd already lost too much to ever be bought again. On a colder morning, nearing winter, she visited her mother's grave. No flowers, just silence. She sat on the grass. Let the quiet sit with her. I used to think justice was something loud, she whispered, like a trial, a fight, a fall. She touched the stone with her fingers, careful. But now I think maybe it's just being able to tell the truth and not be punished for it. Wind tugged her coat. She smiled softly, just once. I did it, Mama. They saw me. They heard me. And then they heard us. Back in the city, a new case arrived on her desk. Different this time. A woman named Anita, former live-in housekeeper for a tech billionaire. She had audio recordings, threats, harassment, confessions of unpaid hours, even the destruction of a health report when she tried to file a complaint. I don't want money, Anita said, her hands shaking. I want him to be seen for what he is, even just once. Irene nodded. You came to the right place. This time, Irene didn't go to the press. She trained Anita to speak for herself. She gave her a voice, taught her how to use it, how to own it, how to walk into a courtroom without looking down. When the case hit the headlines, Anita stood in front of the cameras, nervous but strong. And behind her, off to the side, stood Irene, not a savior, just a shadow, steady, watching, unmoving. Someone once said to her, what you did was incredible. You must feel powerful. But Irene didn't feel powerful. She felt aware. aware of the cracks in the system, the way silence is weaponized, the way cruelty hides behind manners, the way the world rewards arrogance until someone quietly refuses to stay quiet. She never wanted a pedestal. She wanted a mirror, held up to power by the people it tried to erase. In a letter she later received from a young girl whose mother worked nights cleaning office buildings, Irene read this line: "They used to tell me people like us don't get to matter, but then I heard your story. And now I know. They just didn't want us to know we already did." She pinned it to her wall. No awards. No newspaper clippings. Just that one letter. Because it was enough. In the quiet hours of night, when the city dulled and the weight of the day settled, Irene would sit at her window and look at the skyline. She remembered every room she had cleaned in those towers. Every time someone told her she didn't belong. Every whispered slur. Every stolen hour of labor. Every insult dressed as instruction. And now, from this side of the glass, she whispered back, "I was never beneath you. I was just busy becoming unignorable." Spring returned with quiet defiance. The city thawed. Construction noises resumed. Bougainvillea climbed cracked fences. And in the middle of it all, Irene kept working, not in fury, not in fire, but in focus. She had long ago stopped measuring her days in wins or losses. The victories weren't always visible. Sometimes they came in the form of a cleaner who didn't get fired after reporting abuse, a cook who finally got back pay, a mother who wasn't deported because someone listened in time. These were small, unglamorous truths. But Irene had learned something about truth. It doesn't need to scream to shatter glass. One evening, she returned to the hotel where it had all started, not to confront anyone, not to relive the past, just to look. The lobby had been redesigned. Softer lighting, a friendlier tone. A plaque now stood near the front desk, in honor of the workers who make everything possible. It didn't have her name. She didn't want it to. That would have been too easy, a cheap reconciliation dressed as progress. What mattered more was this. The manager who had once looked through her now held the door open for a housekeeper carrying supplies. She said, "Thank you," like it meant something. Irene watched for a moment, then turned and walked away. In the months that followed, a few people tried to reinvent her. Writers wanted to option her story for a film. A producer pitched a limited series. An influencer offered to collab. Each time, Irene replied with the same question: "Will you name the women who still mop your floors at night?" They never responded after that. The firm continued to grow. More staff. A second location. A network of anonymous allies inside systems once thought impenetrable. She mentored young investigators, most from places like hers, homes like hers, names like hers. And when they asked how she knew who to trust, she said, "Listen to who gets interrupted when they speak. That's where the truth is hiding." Then, on a hot Thursday in July, a letter arrived at her office. Cream envelope. Heavy paper. No return address again. Inside was a brief handwritten note. "You changed more than a headline. You changed me." IG Irene sat with it for a while, not in triumph, in reflection. It's one thing to bring down a house of cards. It's another to build something that can't be torn down. Months passed. One day, a school invited her to speak. Public high school in the Bronx, mostly first-gen kids. Mostly overlooked. The kind of school where the counselors rarely expect Ivy League paths, and some teachers just hope no one drops out by senior year. Irene said yes immediately. In the auditorium, the students didn't clap politely. They leaned in. They listened. Some of them were already working. After-school shifts, helping parents clean, translate, survive. She told them the truth. That the world would underestimate them. That silence would be demanded of them. that they'd be called angry for speaking and weak for staying quiet. But, she said, standing before them in the same calm, even tone, if you remember nothing else from today, remember this. They are afraid of you waking up, because once you do, they can't hide anymore. The students didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They simply stood when she finished, not because they were told to, but because they saw something of themselves in her. And they understood. They weren't just listening to a story. They were witnessing permission. One night, long after midnight, Irene walked the old neighborhood again. The street where she had grown up looked smaller now. The stoop where her mother used to sit, the grocery store where she translated bills, the laundromat where she first read a textbook on ethics while waiting for the dryer. So many forgotten places. So many invisible histories. But not anymore. Now she carried them. And they carried her. She stood on the rooftop of her building just as the sky began to blue. Not quite morning. Not quite night. She thought of all the voices she had helped rise. Not with fire. Not with threats. But with dignity. And in that moment she whispered, not to herself, but to the whole city, you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to speak from where they tried to silence you. Some stories end in revenge. Some in defeat. Hers ended in recognition. Not the kind with headlines. The kind where people change how they look at the ones they used to overlook. Where cruelty is named and dignity is reclaimed. Where truth, quiet and slow, is what power never expects. It endures. As she crossed into her neighborhood, she passed a newsstand. There, on the front page of the city's biggest paper, the maid who made them kneel, she almost laughed. They still didn't understand. She hadn't made anyone kneel. She'd simply stood up. Not long after, Irene received a letter. Handwritten, precise, no return address. It read, I remember what I said to you that day, in the lobby. I've played it over in my mind 1,000 times. You were everything I wasn't. Calm, composed, aware. And I hated that. Now I see it. You weren't beneath me. You were ahead of me. This isn't an apology. It's an acknowledgement. Irene folded the note and slid it into the back of a drawer. Not for safekeeping. Just as proof. Some wounds don't heal with time. They heal when the truth is spoken. One of the young lawyers on her team, Malik, 24, whip-smart, asked her once, over coffee, do you ever wish you'd gone public? Used your real name from the start? Irene stirred her drink slowly. No. Why? She met his eyes. Because then they'd make the story about me. I wasn't the story. The story was how many people they stepped on before they looked down. The Hart Hotels chain was rebranded 6 months after the scandal. New leadership, new ethics, a clean sweep, a new name. But people remembered, especially the workers. They started a union. The new CEO didn't fight them. Couldn't. Irene wasn't involved, not directly. But one of the signs at the first protest read, she was watching. Now we are too. Not every story ends with revenge. Sometimes the people who hurt you never fall. But they lose something worse than status. They lose the ability to pretend you don't exist.